Robb Stark stood atop the gentle rise overlooking the Riverlands encampment, gray wind blowing across his cloak. The war was etched into his face, the slight furrow of his brow, the tight set of his jaw. There had been no easy victories for the king in the north, only costly skirmishes and uncertain alliances. This day, he had retreated into his thoughts, recalling the last tidings from his mother, Catelyn Stark, who had been in the south in an attempt to build alliances, first with Renly Baratheon, and now, unbelievably, with Stannis. A swirl of uneasy possibility clung to that name. Stannis Baratheon, the man once overshadowed by his younger brother, who had now emerged as a fearsome claimant to the Iron Throne. Robb did not move from his vantage, letting the wind lash around him like something half-wild. If he truly meant to accept the notion of an alliance with Stannis, he would need to study the lay of the land, read the hearts of men, and guard against the illusions of ambition. He did not relish the thought of bending to another king's demands. Had he not been declared king in the north at River Run? His bannermen had knelt around him in a circle beneath torchlight and sworn fealty. That oath rang in his mind every time he considered aligning himself with any of the other claimants. Still, every step forward in this war was overshadowed by the Lannisters and their hold on King's Landing. Their archers on the walls, the gold cloaks that patrolled the streets, the Red Keep looming over all. Even so, the rumors said that Stannis had the largest fleet, a cold determination, and a priestess rumored to weave dark miracles in the night, aligning with a man who worshipped a strange god, and had burned the Seven in effigy, felt as though it went against everything the North believed in. Then again, was that a heavier betrayal than letting the Lannisters keep Sansa captive, or leaving his father's murder unavenged? A polite cough drew Robb's attention behind him. There stood Roose Bolton, pale eyes regarding him with careful restraint. The man's every motion seemed measured, as if something half-submerged lurked beneath his skin. Beside him was the Greyjohn, as tall and broad as any man in the encampment, fists as big as hams, wearing a grin that revealed a few missing teeth. They had come to see if the reports were true, that a messenger from Stannis would arrive soon, that Robb was considering words of truce, perhaps even something like alliance. Robb offered them a tight nod, his breath faintly visible in the chill evening air. "Tents are being struck," Roose Bolton commented in that eerily mild tone of his. "Are we moving south tonight?" The Greyjohn barked out a laugh before Robb could answer. "Moving south to dance with the Red Stag, or to cross swords with the Lions. We should keep ourselves on the Lannisters' heels. Best keep them from getting comfortable." Robb turned on his heel to face the pair, his cloak swishing against his legs. "We'll hold our position for the moment. The messenger from Dragonstone is due to arrive before nightfall. I'd see what the man has to say." Then he turned again toward the horizon, letting silence stretch out for a moment. In that silence, his mind flicked over the memory of his mother's letters. Catelyn, who had once tried to broker peace with Renly, had soon found herself witness to his gruesome, unnatural death. She had never disclosed fully what she'd seen, only that it had been no common matter. Now word reached them that Stannis might be open to forging a pact with the king in the north, if the objective was to dethrone Joffrey Baratheon and see justice done for Ned Stark's execution. Or so the rumor went. "I would hear it from their own lips," Robb concluded. "No decision will be made otherwise." The Greyjohn nodded fiercely. "Aye, my lord. When have you ever rushed into folly? The men say that Stannis is a hard man, a righteous one, but that red sorceress at his side, we might do well to keep her at arm's length." "Madam." "And we shall," Robb replied, though inwardly, a coil of apprehension tightened in his gut. The crows overhead cawed, tracing black arcs against the broad sky. A sense of omen hovered in the crisp air. By nightfall, the messenger arrived, escorted by the guards posted at the outer edges of the Stark army. He was a slim man with a shorn head, clad in a battered cloak that might have once been dyed a deep russet. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. Clearly, the journey from Dragonstone had not been easy, or so he said when he was brought to Robb Stark's command tent. He bowed stiffly, half awkward, to the king in the north. "Lord Stannis Baratheon sends his greetings, your grace," he said, voice dry as though he had swallowed an ocean's worth of salt. "He would bid you audience in the Stormlands, where he presently commands. Word is that he has the bannermen of the late Lord Renly about him. He would know if House Stark will accept common cause. If so, the Iron Throne will be contested. And, with your strength added, seized. If not, well." The messenger's eyes did not quite flinch, but there was a guardedness in them that told Robb enough. They would simply remain rivals, if not outright enemies. Robb studied the man's face. Behind him stood his bannerman. Bolton, the Great John, Rickard Karstark, and a handful of others, watchful, measuring. Robb spoke quietly, yet the weight of his words carried. "I'll consider the proposal. If Lord Stannis is indeed open to a meeting, we will see him on neutral ground." He paused, letting the tension settle. "But if this is a trick, I'll have your head." The messenger swallowed, but something like a wry acceptance flickered in his expression. "Lord Stannis does not stoop to trickery. If you come in good faith, so shall he." That night, Robb found little sleep, even though his body screamed with weariness after weeks of marching and days of skirmishes against Lannister scouts. He lay on his cot. Gray wind curled at the entrance of his tent. The direwolf's ears perked at the slightest noise. The lamp overhead cast long shadows across the canvas walls, shadows that danced like restless spirits. In those shapes, Robb thought he glimpsed the forms of his dead. His father's face, the vacant stare of men lost at Whispering Wood, the uncertain eyes of those forced to follow a boy they called king. But in the swirl of images, he also saw something else. A stag and a wolf, side by side, eyes fixed on the south. When morning came, it brought an overcast sky. The clouds sat like wool over the rising sun. The encampment was slow to rouse, the men sensing a shift in the air. Something was being decided this day. Somewhere in the gloom, the clanging of metal on metal signaled weapons practice, and the smell of wood smoke and porridge hung about the camp. Robb dressed himself in boiled leather and a wolf pelt cloak, then stepped out to address his advisors. Catelyn was not present. She had slipped away in the night to return from whence she came. Or so one of his outriders had quietly informed him. She was heading south, perhaps to treat with Stannis directly. He felt a twinge of anxiety, but also relief. Negotiations were her strength, and if she could smooth the path with Stannis, so much the better. Still, it felt wrong not having her by his side. She had once tried to parley with Renly, and that had ended in tragedy. But that was all behind them now. Renly was gone, and only Stannis remained. In their war council that morning, men ringed around a makeshift table with cups of ale and dark bread in their hands. Some wore the solemn look of those who had buried too many friends. Others were quietly resigned to following Robb. By the end of their conversation, no clear conclusion was reached, for the men were divided. Some saw no value in trusting Stannis, who had never been a friend to the North and whose talk of a red god unnerved them. Others argued that the North alone did not have the numbers or the fleet to besiege King's Landing effectively, no matter how cunning Robb's tactics. Their only hope, so they insisted, lay in forging alliances, preferably with another foe of the Lannisters. The next afternoon, Robb decided to send out a party of scouts to gauge the roads to Storm's End, where word had it Stannis was moving next. The aged fortress was in the Stormlands, far to the southeast, but if he marched, he would pass near the Blackwater. Doing so would bring him close to King's Landing as well, setting the stage for a confrontation that could decide the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Robb resolved to at least meet Stannis in person. If it came to war with him, better to see the measure of the man before crossing swords. Thus began a cautious march southward. The main host remained behind for a time, while Robb took a carefully chosen vanguard of men. They skirted the riverlands, passing the scorched villages still reeling from Gregor Clegan's raids. Robb found himself noticing how many families had fled, how many once prosperous fields lay torn by hoofbeats and sword. The further south they went, the more the land bore scars, entire hamlets abandoned, farmland blackened. His men rode in a tense hush, sometimes passing groups of small folk who looked upon them with weary eyes. No one greeted them as saviors. The people were frightened, uncertain of which side to trust. Robb felt the weight of it, the knowledge that war was not only a game of kings, but a devastation upon the humble and innocent. That weight pressed upon his heart, and he dreamed again that night, seeing wolves and stags running through a forest of flame. On the 5th day of the journey, they came upon a merchant caravan heading north in haste. The merchant said that a large contingent of Stannis' men had been spotted on the road to Storm's End, flying the flaming heart banners, the crowned stag at their center. Rumors also swirled that Stannis had with him a woman of red hair who commanded shadows. Robb noticed how the mention of her frightened even these traveling merchants. Whispers and speculation turned her into something like a demon. Robb tried to clamp down his own misgivings, focusing instead on the practical matter of forging an alliance. Wolves do not fear the dark, he told himself. Yet the memory of Renly's strange death lingered on the tongue of rumor. They pressed on through winding roads, crossing a half-burned bridge over a narrow stream, occasionally halting to send out riders ahead to ensure the route was clear. Once, they spotted a distant band of riders that vanished over a hill. Robb's men were instantly on edge, some stringing bows, others forming a defensive wedge. But no attack came. It seemed that not everyone was eager for more bloodshed. That afternoon, as they stopped near a copse of trees to water the horses, the Great John approached Robb with a concerned look in his eyes. "Majesty," he began, scratching at the beard that covered half his face. "I'd not normally question your aims, but the men are uneasy. We've warred enough that they know what to expect from Lannisters. Stannis is a different matter. His cause is said to be just, but these stories of his Red Priestess are ill-omened. My men mutter about curses and black magic." Robb nodded, gazing at the reflection of the sky in the slow-moving water. "I share their concern, but we can't stand alone forever. Tywin Lannister is regrouping, or so the scouts say. He'll come at us with renewed ferocity soon enough. Then the fight will be on our lands again, and I'd rather bring the war to the Lannisters than wait for them to burn the north to cinders. An alliance with Stannis, uneasy though it may be, might put an end to Joffrey's reign. Our lands deserve better than to be ravaged, Yark." The Great John grunted in half approval. It might be so. Only I pray that, if we do treat with Stannis, we keep a close watch on his Red Woman." There was a flicker of superstitious fear in his voice, though the man was too boisterous to admit it plainly. "Wolves don't trust sorcery, nor do I." They rode on, day slipping into dusk, the sky tinged with the burnt orange of a late autumn sun. Another day passed, then another, each marked by the same routine of riding, scouting, and anxious tension. Finally, on the 8th day since they'd left the main host, they reached the outlying lands that rumor claimed were under the watch of Stannis' forward scouts. A small ring fort perched on a low rise, black shapes of men visible along its walls, the banners too distant to make out in the failing light. Robb called a halt, ordering his men to establish a temporary camp in a stand of ancient oaks near a shallow ravine. As they worked, erecting tents and picketing the horses, Robb stared at the ring fort in the distance, wondering if Stannis was inside, or if it was simply a band of outlaws. In the quiet that followed, Grey Wind padded over to nudge Robb's leg, exhaling a low rumbling sound in his throat. The direwolf scented something in the wind. Robb looked down, a flicker of tenderness lighting his eyes. "Easy, boy," he murmured, stroking the fur along Grey Wind's neck. The wolf's hackles were raised. "We'll see soon enough if friend or foe awaits us." Night fell in earnest, the moon thin and shrouded by drifting clouds. Torches glimmered faintly on the ring fort's parapets. Even from this distance, Robb could sense a readiness, a watchfulness. He posted double sentries around his own camp, not wanting to be caught unawares. He ate little of the salted beef and hard bread that comprised the night's meal, unable to shake the tension from his limbs. For a fleeting moment, he thought of his sisters in King's Landing, of young Bran and Rickon in Winterfell, and felt the pang of separation. He prayed that the gods, old and new, would see them safe. At the first break of dawn, Robb roused himself and took a small party toward the ring fort. With him rode the Great John, Bolton, and Karstark, along with 10 men-at-arms. They carried a pale white banner of truce. The sun's first rays caught in the dew on the grass, casting tiny rainbows with each hoofbeat. Though it looked peaceful, Each man was tense, scanning the ramparts for any sign of archers. As they drew nearer, they could see the flaming heart banner, black stag within, fluttering from a tall wooden pole. This was indeed a force loyal to Stannis. The gate of the fort opened a crack, and a few men emerged, wearing mail and plate dyed dark with the symbol of the crowned stag upon their chests. Leading them was a gaunt knight with pinched features and a battered shield, who raised a hand in a gesture of parley. "Who rides under truce?" he called out. "I am Robb Stark, king in the north," Robb replied, his voice carrying over the still morning air. "We come to speak with Lord Stannis. I am told he wishes common cause against the Lannisters." The knight considered them for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well, your grace. Lord Stannis expects you. Surrender your weapons and enter." A murmur of protest rose among Robb's men, but he silenced it with a gloved hand. Sensing no immediate treachery, and mindful that he was the one coming to treat, Robb dismounted and unsheathed his sword, offering it at hilt first to the knight. The Great John and the others followed suit, albeit with visible reluctance. Only Roose Bolton seemed entirely calm, his pale eyes unreadable. The stagmen led them inside, though Robb noted that not all men in the courtyard wore the crowned stag sigil. Some apparently carried the shields of lords who'd once sworn to Renly. However, the flaming heart with its black stag was omnipresent, a grim reminder of which Baratheon brother held the power here. Inside the ring fort, battered tents and makeshift structures huddled against the walls. Men busied themselves with sharpening swords, binding wounds, or cooking meager fare over open fires. Their expressions, lean and hungry, spoke of a hardship not unlike that endured by Robb's own men. War had battered both sides. A hush fell over them as they recognized the king in the north among them. More than a few gazes were drawn by Grey Wind, who padded after Robb, the direwolf's amber eyes scanning for threats. They were taken to a large tent near the center. Its exterior dyed a deep red, with the heraldry of House Baratheon on display. Before the entrance stood two guards wearing black and gold surcoats, halberds crossed before them. One guard peered at Robb's face, hesitating only an instant before lifting his weapon. The flap was drawn open, and inside, at last, stood Stannis Baratheon. He was a man of middle years, hair receding at the temples, his mouth set in a perpetual frown. The lines of anger, or perhaps grim determination, seemed carved into his features. Despite the enclosed space, he wore mail over boiled leather, and at his side was a sword sheathed in a plain scabbard. His eyes were cool and dark, flicking over Robb, and then the direwolf. The Red Woman was there too, tall and graceful, her red robes swirling around her as if in an invisible breeze. Her hair was the color of flame, and her eyes sparkled with a strange intensity. Robb felt an involuntary chill, but he forced himself not to look away. "King Robb," Stannis said at last, his voice raspy yet firm. "I see you've come in person, bold but wise. I weary of dealing with envoys." Robb inclined his head, though not deeply. He was here as a king, after all. "Lord Stannis, you asked for my ear, and you have it." Stannis studied him in silence for a moment. "You've had victories against the Lannisters from all reports, yet you've not pressed King's Landing. If your aim was to sit on the Iron Throne, you could have marched south at once." He paused, waiting for Robb's reaction. "I do not seek the Iron Throne," Robb answered evenly. "I want justice for my father, and I want the North free from the tyranny of the Iron Throne. My lords declared me king in the North, not the Seven Kingdoms. But we have a common enemy. The Lannisters hold my sister Sansa captive. They hold the throne under Joffrey, an abomination. We would see him cast down." Stannis' expression did not soften, but Robb noticed the faint shift of his posture. "Then you would see the rightful king enthroned?" he asked, voice edged with challenge. The Red Woman, meanwhile, watched silently with her unblinking stare. Grey Wind growled low in his throat, making some of the men tense. Yet Stannis appeared unperturbed. "I would see justice done," Robb said. "You claim the Iron Throne by right of blood, as Robert's heir. So long as you acknowledge the North as free afterward, I would not challenge your claim. My war is with the Lannisters, not with you. If we can unite to tear them from the Red Keep, so much the better." At that, the Red Woman stepped forward. Even as she moved, the shadows in the tent seemed to sway oddly. Her voice was soft, melodic, yet carried a resonance that made the hairs on Robb's arms prickle. "A wolf of the north and the stag of the narrow sea," she murmured. The flames spoke of this union. "The cold eyes of the wolf shall pierce the shadows, and the unyielding stag shall conquer the false prophets. It is the Lord of Light's will." Robb couldn't hide the flash of unease that crossed his face. He did not care for prophecies or red gods. Yet he fixed his gaze on Stannis, ignoring the woman as best he could. "We both want the same thing. The Lannisters defeated, Joffrey unseated. If we work together, that day may come soon." "Ben." Stannis nodded, though the lines of his face suggested it was not easy for him to appear agreeable. "My fleet moves soon for King's Landing. I would see the city taken and the boy king forced from the throne. The Lannisters must answer for their crimes. You have proven your skill in battle. Your men are loyal. With your army pressing on land and my ships blockading the Blackwater Bay, the Lannisters would be caught between hammer and anvil." A hush drew over the tent. Robb could feel the tension in his own party, particularly from the Greatjon, who looked ready to break the silence with a bluster of demands. But the man held his tongue, surprising Robb. Roose Bolton's eyes flicked between Stannis and the Red Woman, his face impassive. Karstark's jaw was clenched with barely concealed resentment, but he said nothing. "I'll need your word," Robb finally said, drawing a slow breath. "Once the city is taken, the North goes free. My bannermen want no part in the Southern Wars once the Lannisters are finished. We would vow never to war against the throne so long as you keep the peace. But the North shall remain under its own king." "Nanti." Stannis' expression hardened. "Is that so?" he said quietly. "How can I, the rightful king, allow the kingdom to fracture? Duty demands that I hold the 7 kingdoms as one realm. It was my brother Robert's seat, and so it must be mine." The refusal was poised on his lips, and Robb felt his hopes sink. Before the tension could mount further, the Red Woman placed her hand on Stannis' forearm. "There is more than one path to unite the realm," she said in that quiet, mesmerizing tone. "The war is not yet won. For now, we accept the hand of the wolf. Let the North keep its ways if it must. What matters is saving the people of Westeros from the darkness that creeps across these lands." Stannis seemed to bristle at her interruption. He opened his mouth as though to speak, then closed it, glancing at Robb, studying him with an intensity that made the young king's blood warm. Something flickered in Stannis' eyes, a cold calculation, or perhaps the recognition that he could not storm King's Landing alone. Not after the debacle of the Blackwater that he had nearly won but lost at the last moment in so many rumors. He let a silence stretch, then let out a breath that sounded like rusted gates opening. "I will consider your terms," Stannis said at length, though his voice was gruff. "I will not guarantee independence for the North outright, but if we stand victorious, we shall negotiate the matter in good faith." He paused, letting that concession settle. "Make no mistake, I intend to rule as the rightful king of Westeros. If I find the North's demands too great, I will not bend. But the Lannisters must be overthrown first." His eyes met Robb's, and the tension between them crackled like distant thunder. "Will you stand beside me on that day?" Robb exhaled, aware that he was stepping onto uncertain ground. He had hoped for a clearer pledge, but perhaps this was the best he could wrest from a man like Stannis Baratheon. "I will," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The Lannisters must pay for what they've done. We can see this through together, or die in the attempt." "Man, no, beside." Stannis gave a curt nod. "Very well. Then let us plan for war." That was the moment a tenuous alliance was struck. An unspoken tension lingered, especially around the Red Woman, whose scrutiny of Robb felt like the flicker of candlelight across a dark corridor. Yet the men on both sides recognized the necessity of the pact, though not all were pleased, particularly those who cared less about dethroning Joffrey and more about vengeance for old slights. None dared speak against Stannis in his own camp, and Robb's men kept a stoic front. Still, as preparations began, the contrast between the Northerners and Stannis' men was striking. The Northerners were sturdy and used to cold marches, proud in their old gods and their thick furs, while Stannis' men had a severity about them, as though shaped by storms and an unwavering discipline that matched their lord's unyielding temperament. In the days that followed, Robb and Stannis conferred often, mapping out routes toward King's Landing. Stannis' loyalists talked of the battered remains of his fleet that lingered near Dragonstone, repaired enough for one more attempt at the Blackwater. If they could coordinate with Robb's ground forces, they might surround the city and starve the Lannisters out, or else take it by a coordinated assault. Every day the ringfort seemed more crowded as men arrived, some from the Reach grudgingly switching allegiance to Stannis after Renly's demise, others from distant corners hearing that the king in the north had joined with the older Baratheon brother. In the uncertain swirl of alliances, a new power base was emerging. Robb found himself observing Stannis with a mixture of caution and reluctant respect. The man was no charmer, nothing like Renly had been, if rumors were to be believed, but he commanded respect through sheer will. He was also surprisingly direct, never mincing words, nor making small talk. At times, Robb glimpsed a flicker of raw anger beneath that stoic surface, a seething resentment at the world for not recognizing his claims sooner, for forcing him to ally with a boy who had crowned himself in the north. But he held it in check, as a hawk might keep its talons sheathed. One evening, after a lengthy planning session, Robb stepped out of the main tent, grateful for the coolness of the evening air. His head throbbed with the complexities of war. Grey Wind fell into step beside him, silent and watchful. The camp was quieter now. Many men already asleep or tending small fires. The sky was littered with stars. He thought of the names they gave the constellations in Winterfell, and how different they might be in the eyes of the Red God. The idea unsettled him. He saw the shape of the direwolf among the patterns in the heavens, and found comfort in it. He paused by a low-burning fire, where a few men huddled around a pot of stew. They nodded respectfully as he passed. Robb caught snippets of their conversation, hushed words about the strange red woman and the tales of shadow assassins. He felt a prickle of unease, recalling how his mother had refused to speak plainly about Renly's death, except to say that there had been something unnatural in the gloom of that tent, and that was the woman who now wandered this camp, presumably still serving her lord, Stannis. If there were truly powers at work through her, could the North's cause be compromised? Yet he dismissed such thoughts, reminding himself that the war was the priority. He would have to keep a wary eye, but for now, forging a path to take King's Landing was paramount. The Lannisters had shown them no mercy, so he could show none in return. With Stannis' fleet and the combined might of both armies, King's Landing might fall in a matter of weeks. Beyond that day lay a tangle of questions. Would Stannis keep his vague promise to negotiate the North's freedom? Or would he insist upon subjugation once the Iron Throne was secured? There was no knowing. But at least it would be a confrontation on that day, in that future, rather than here and now, where the Lannisters still threatened from behind their walls. Later that same night, Robb received a surprise visitor. He was seated at a rough-hewn table in his temporary command tent, poring over a map that showed the roads around King's Landing. His guards announced that Lady Melisandre wished to speak with him alone. Robb stiffened, uncertain if he should allow the Red Woman into his midst without the presence of his men. But something in him bristled at the idea that he might appear fearful. So he nodded and ordered them to admit her. She entered in a rustle of crimson fabric, her eyes gleaming with the light of the single lantern. Grey Wind stood, lips peeled back to show his teeth, a low growl simmering in his throat. Her gaze shifted to the direwolf, and she smiled faintly before returning her attention to Robb. "Your companion is wary of shadows," she said in that soft, haunting tone. "A wise beast." Robb forced his heart to remain steady. "Why have you come?" She moved closer, the glow of the lantern illuminating her hair so it seemed almost aflame. "The Lord of Light gave me a vision," she said quietly, tilting her head as if listening to a far-off voice. "I saw a stag locked in battle with a lion. The wolf leapt upon the lion's back, rending it. The stag emerged battered but unbroken, and the wolf bled from a deep wound. Fire raged across the land, and the shadows writhed." She paused, letting the ominous imagery sink in. I have come to tell you that all must unfold in its time. War is a dark flame that consumes everything, yet sometimes from destruction comes renewal. Robb eyed her warily. I am no devout follower of your god, my lady. The old gods watch over me and my men. I seek no dark magic. Dark or light, the power is the same. It is but a question of the fires we kindle in our hearts. She turned her face, looking about the tent as though searching for hidden spirits. You want your sisters back, your home safe. You want the Lannisters punished. That is the fire within you. The Lord of Light does not spurn such flames. Despite himself, Robb felt a pang. Thoughts of Sansa and Arya troubled him constantly. If the Red Woman was trying to manipulate him with talk of them, she was wasting her breath, he told himself. Yet he could not help a flicker of hope that any alliance might speed the day he could free his sisters. I'll do whatever must be done to save them, but I'll not dabble in sorcery or blood sacrifices. We Starks do not bargain with shadows. He kept his tone firm, letting her know there would be no bending. Her thin smile was inscrutable. We shall see. The flames show many paths, and only some come to pass. Tread carefully, young wolf. Then, as swiftly as she had come, she glided out, leaving the tent's entrance flapping in her wake. Grey Wind relaxed his stance, but continued to stare after her, ears laid back in mistrust. Robb's nerves were on edge. He heard the faint murmur of the night wind, the crackle of distant campfires. Slowly, he exhaled, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. He reminded himself that he could face the swords of the Lannisters, the cunning of the Freys, even the stoic severity of Stannis. He had to. The alternative was surrender or annihilation. When he finally lay down on his cot, he did not sleep easily. Rest came in fitful waves, beset by dreams of storms and swirling flames, of a lion's roar echoing over the plains, of a stag with eyes like a dead man's. He saw Winterfell's gray walls half buried in snow, and the crypts beneath where his ancestors slept. He saw his father's face. Then he saw Joffrey, smirking on the Iron Throne, the diadem askew on his golden curls. He dreamed of being in the Red Keep's throne room. How small it looked in the flickering torches, how the pillars cast long, black shapes across the floor. In the dream, the shapes seemed to move, creeping closer, and he realized they were not just shadows, but living spirits of darkness. He gripped his sword, only to find it was made of ice, melting in his hand. The heat was unbearable, stifling. He heard a soft, mocking laugh. Then came a flash of steel, a chilling roar, and he woke, heart pounding, drenched in sweat despite the chill of the night. Outside, dawn approached in a paling sky, a ragged edge of clouds drifting in from the east. Robb rose, dressed, and stepped outside, letting the cold bite his skin in a bracing welcome to reality. Grey Wind trailed at his heel. The camp was already stirring. Stannis' men moved with a silent efficiency, stoking cookfires and polishing arms. Farther off, Robb's northern guard was assembling, ready for his commands. Today would bring more councils of war, more planning, all steps on a path that might lead them to King's Landing. He let his gaze drift across the rolling fields beyond the fort's walls. They would be marching soon, joining with his larger host, forging a combined force that might be enough to crack the Lannisters' hold on the capital. Yet the city was ringed by formidable defenses, and Tywin Lannister was no fool. If Stannis' attempt at Blackwater Bay had taught them anything, it was that victory was never assured, not until the final blow was struck. Robb felt a mixture of determination and dread, the tension of a taut bowstring that could snap at any moment. But the time had come to move forward, to cross that threshold of caution into the unknown. The vow to avenge Ned Stark still burned like a fever in his veins. He owed it to his father, his sisters, and all the men who had rallied to the cry of the King in the North. Perhaps in this uneasy alliance with Stannis, he could find the way. And if the price was a measure of compromise, of dealing with men and forces he did not understand, then so be it. The North would remember. He would make certain of that. So long as the direwolf ran free, so long as the blood of Winterfell remained, he would see justice done, no matter how many storms they had to weather. He lifted his head to the gray sky, inhaling the crisp morning air. The wind tugged at the ends of his hair, carrying the faint tang of burning wood from the cook fires. He could almost taste the possibility of triumph. Somewhere far away, a raven cawed, a lonely sound in the stillness. Robb wrapped his cloak closer around him, feeling the steady presence of gray wind at his side. He thought again of his mother, out there somewhere on the roads, perhaps riding under the same sky. He thought of the faces of his father and brothers, of the legacy they had all inherited. Then, with a final glance toward the eastern horizon, he walked on through the camp, toward the uncertain dawn of the alliance that might reshape the course of this war, and all of Westeros with it. One morning light filtered through the sparse canopy of oaks as Robb Stark pulled a riding glove onto his stiff fingers. Sleep clung to him like a damp cloak. He had wrestled with uneasy dreams all night, dark shapes flickering at the edges of his mind. Gray wind paced beside him, nose low to the ground, as if following a scent invisible to human eyes. Several yards away, the men of House Stark and House Baratheon mingled under the watchful gaze of posted sentries. The ring fort was stirring earlier than usual this day, for whispers had spread that both kings planned to depart by midday. Two armies, once unknown to each other, now prepared to move in unison, forging a single spearhead aimed at the heart of the Seven Kingdoms. Robb winced as he tested his sword arm, bruised from the last sparring session with the Greatjon. The older man had not held back, perhaps because he sensed Robb's own pent-up frustrations. In truth, Robb was grateful for it. Pain reminded him that he was alive, not lost in the swirl of politics and uneasy alliances. He noticed how the Red Woman's presence had kept the camp on edge, day by day, hour by hour. Her fiery silhouette appeared here and there, speaking quietly with Stannis bannermen, offering cryptic words to any who would listen. Some men swore they saw her alone at night, staring into a bowl of flames, murmuring incantations. Others said she spoke to no one at all and simply vanished into the gloom until dawn. Robb tried to dismiss the rumors, but he couldn't deny that her presence cast a long shadow over every council meeting. As he fastened his cloak, he saw Lord Karstark approach. Karstark had become something of a silent sentinel, always hovering at the edge of Robb's field of vision. The older lord's eyes were clouded with old grief. He had lost sons in this war, and the thirst for Lannister blood still burned fiercely behind every curt word he spoke. Today, he dipped his head to Robb, a gesture that carried both respect and the unspoken question. "When do we begin?" "Lord Karstark," Robb said quietly, "is all in order." Karstark paused, glancing around to ensure no one else stood too close. "We have near 7,000 men preparing to ride, many of them your loyal bannermen from the Riverlands and the north. We've reorganized the supply lines as best we can. There's been talk of bandits on the roads ahead, but small matter. They're not compared to what awaits us at King's Landing." "Good," Robb said, pleased by the efficiency. "We'll be departing soon enough. I want the men to be ready for a long march. Stannis insists we make for the Blackwater in haste." Karstark's jaw tightened. He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "There's an unease, Your Grace. Many men worry this alliance will end poorly. They don't trust Stannis, and they trust his red sorceress even less. Some fear we've tied ourselves to dark forces." Robb forced himself not to sigh. "We are allied for now because we share a common enemy. The men are free to fear what they will, but we cannot let rumor and superstition paralyze us. We need Stannis' ships. He needs our strength on land. For the sake of the North and for vengeance on the Lannisters, we'll see it through. Afterward, we'll handle Stannis as we must." Karstark nodded, the movement stiff with tension. "Aye, my lord." He started to walk away, then paused. "I never believed I'd see a day when the king in the north marched beside any Baratheon. But times change, the world changes. Let us hope the old gods still guide your hand." He left, boots crunching over the gravel, leaving Robb to brood over his words. The old gods, the new gods, the red gods. There seemed to be a dozen faiths contending for men's souls, and the war had dragged them all into sharp relief. Robb drew in a deep breath. If the gods had a plan for him, he prayed it aligned with saving his family and restoring the North to peace. He moved across the ringfort's dusty courtyard, acknowledging the bows and nods of passing knights and guards. Though the joint camp was still a temporary measure, it teemed with life. Men brushing horses, smiths hammering dents from breastplates, cooks stirring thick pots of porridge. A wave of smoke drifted across the yard, stinging the air. Robb caught the pungent aroma of bacon too, and his stomach gave a low grumble. It had been a day since he'd last eaten a proper meal. War councils often devoured the hours in which a man might otherwise rest or eat. Near the center of the courtyard, Stannis Baratheon stood with several of his knights, including the gaunt, sharp-featured man who had greeted Robb at the gate on his first arrival. Stannis' face was as stern as ever, lips pressed thin, his brow creased by perpetual displeasure. He wore plate armor embossed with the flaming heart, the crowned stag in its center. His cloak was black, short, and trimmed with a pale, weather-beaten fur. The entire impression was one of bleak severity. When he caught sight of Robb, he dismissed his knights with a curt gesture and stepped forward. "King Robb?" Stannis said, voice low. "Our scouts returned near dawn. The roads ahead are clear enough of any large Lannister force, though they spotted small pockets of outlaws. We'll have to keep our eyes open." He gave a short, mirthless exhale. "I'm told your men are quick to adapt. Let us hope that remains true." Robb inclined his head. "They'll handle whatever trouble awaits on the road. I hear your ships are moving to the mouth of Blackwater Bay soon." Stannis' jaw set. "Sir Davos is overseeing the final repairs at Dragonstone and will follow as soon as the fleet is ready. I've sent word that we'll converge on the capital within a fortnight if all goes well." There was a brief, shared silence as they both considered the uncertain future of that phrase. If all goes well. Robb half expected Melisandre to materialize behind Stannis' shoulder, offering some cryptic guarantee that the Lord of Light would deliver them. But she was nowhere in sight. Stannis' gaze wandered across the courtyard, lingering on Robb's men, many of whom were taller and bearded, wearing the sigils of the direwolf. "I'll take my main army east," he said, "while you lead yours slightly north, circling the Roserad. We'll converge before we reach the city, forcing the Lannister outriders to split their attention. That might buy enough time for my ships to blockade the Blackwater. If the Gold Cloaks lose supplies from the sea, it'll fray their morale." Robb nodded. The plan made sense, enough so that they had spent hours over maps refining it. "Once the city is encircled, we'll send terms for surrender." Stannis' lips twitched in a grim half-smile. "Joffrey will never surrender, nor will the Lannisters around him. They'll cling to the throne until we peel their fingers off it. We'll have to break them in the field or storm the walls." The words hung in the air, stark with the promise of future bloodshed. Robb stared at the outline of Stannis' face, the angles worn by distrust and pride. For a moment he wondered if this alliance would truly last beyond the city's fall. But he banished the thought. One war at a time, he told himself. Stannis cleared his throat. "Gather your men. We break camp at midday." With that, he turned on his heel. Robb watched him walk away, posture rigid. In truth, they were two kings forced into a single cause, neither entirely comfortable with the other's presence. The road to King's Landing would test them both. Robb silently prayed that Tywin Lannister hadn't mustered a hidden legion to fall on them when they least expected it. When midday came, the combined armies set out in two great columns. Robb rode at the head of his host, flanked by the Great John on one side and Roose Bolton on the other, with Karstark and a handful of knights trailing close behind. Their banners caught the wan sunlight, direwolves snapping in the breeze. Farther along the line trailed dozens of supply wagons, escorted by outriders. The entire procession creaked and clanked its way onto the main road. A slow, ponderous beast made of steel and leather. Stannis led his own column eastward, their path soon veering off from Robb's. Even though they parted company, scouts would keep lines of communication open, ensuring both armies knew the other's position at all times. Still, Robb could not help the twinge of anxiety as he watched Stannis' banner grow smaller behind a haze of dust. If Stannis chose to betray him, or if a cunning Lannister attack managed to isolate the Stark forces, all could be lost in a blink. Yet forging onward was their only real option. The day stretched before them, hours of travel beneath a wan sky that offered neither warmth nor the threat of rain. The land they rode through bore the scars of conflict. Fields trampled by cavalry, farmsteads abandoned or burned. Occasionally, they passed rivulets stained with ash, as if entire groves had once been set aflame. War was an unforgiving creature, 1,000 jaws devouring the countryside. Robb felt each sight weigh on him. By dusk, they had covered a decent stretch of road, though not without encountering the first signs of trouble. A small band of brigands, perhaps once soldiers who had deserted from some lord's levy, attempted to ambush one of the supply wagons at a narrow bend. Robb's outriders chased them off, slaying 2 and scattering the rest into the trees. No further harassment ensued that night, but everyone stayed alert. For the evening, they set up camp on a gently sloping hill, ringed by tall grass that whispered in the breeze. Robb's tent was hastily erected at the center, with a perimeter of guard fires. As he warmed his hands by the flames, the Greatjon took a seat on a tree stump opposite him, gnawing on a strip of smoked venison. The big man's face glistened in the firelight, and he paused in his chewing to offer a grin. "We're on the right path," the Greatjon said. "We keep this pace, we'll be in striking distance of the capital soon enough. Then the real fight begins." Robb nodded, taking the cup of ale that one of his men handed him. He sipped, the bitter tang washing over his tongue. "Let's hope we can keep discipline in the ranks. I want no stragglers, and no men wandering off to loot. The Lannisters will look for any weakness. They'll find none," the Greatjon answered, his bass voice resonating among the flickering shadows. "They'll only find northern steel at their throats." He tore off another piece of venison, teeth flashing. Robb managed a small smile. The Greatjon's confidence could be brash, but sometimes it was exactly what Robb needed to hear. Dourness and caution had their place. Yet a king needed men who believed victory was within reach. All the same, an uneasy feeling tugged at Robb's senses. He glanced up at the starless sky. As night deepened, Robb withdrew to his tent, briefing the sentries to remain vigilant. Inside, a brazier glowed orange, offering some meager heat. He eased onto a stout traveling bench, unbuckled his sword belt, and set his blade aside. In moments like this, the burdens of leadership pressed hardest. His mind churned with questions of strategy, alliances, and the uncertain future. What if Stannis reached the capital first? What if Tywin Lannister lay in wait along a hidden route, ready to strike when the Stark forces were most vulnerable? How many more men would die before he could free his sisters? He hunkered over the table, sorting through maps. A page of parchment caught his eye, a hastily drawn note from one of his mother's last letters. She wrote of uncertain tidings from the Vale, of possibility in forging an alliance with certain lords there if the winds of war turned. But it was dated weeks ago. Too late to matter now, perhaps. The Vale had sealed itself behind the bloody gate, half ruled by that boy lord, Robb and Arryn, guided by Petyr Baelish. Robb didn't know what to believe of the rumors swirling about that cunning man. And in any case, the Vale had made no move in the war. The North stood alone, even as it sought an ally in Stannis. At some point, weariness overcame him, and he sank into a restless doze. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw swirling shapes again. Wolves, stags, lions, and crows. A high, keening wind tore across a bloody field, scattering banners left and right. A single flame burned in the midst of it all, bright and hungry. Faces loomed in the fire. Sansa, thin-cheeked and sorrowful. Arya, with haunted eyes that no longer looked like a child's. His father's face, cold in death, the North yet unavenged. Then came a shape too dark to name, a living shadow that flitted at the corner of his sight. He thought he heard a name whispered. Melisandre. The fires roared, and he jolted awake, heart pounding. It was still night. The brazier's embers glowed faintly, and gray wind lay curled by the tent flap, ears twitching in slumber. Robb wiped sweat from his brow, panting. He knew time was precious, knew he needed every scrap of sleep he could snatch. But the memory of that swirling darkness lingered, leaving him unsettled until dawn. They broke camp early, pressing onward through the next day and the next. The road curved around low, rolling hills, past empty farmsteads and trampled wheat fields. More brigands tested their guard, but the Northerners repelled them each time, taking minimal losses. Some of the men found sorry comfort in looting the brigands' weapons and the occasional crate of salted fish, a meager prize. Yet the gloom of war pressed on them. A hush clung to the marching host, as if each soldier felt a storm gathering on the horizon. On the fourth day out from the ring fort, late in the afternoon, Robb's outriders brought in a prisoner. A ragged man with a broken nose and eyes full of cunning. They thrust him to his knees before Robb, who had halted the column near a shallow creek to water the horses. "We found him tailing us from the east," one of the outriders said, panting. "We think he might be Lannister scum. He had scraps of gold thread in his pouch." Robb studied the prisoner. The man's clothing, while torn and dirty, had a look of once good quality. He wore a tarnished ring on one finger. "Who do you serve?" Robb demanded, voice low. The prisoner spat on the ground, though he kept his eyes downcast. "No one. I was cast out from the city months ago. I only wanted a bit of coin." The Great John barked a laugh. "He lees. Likely a spy or a deserter from some lord's guard." Robb knelt to meet the man's gaze. "If you truly serve no one, you'd be better off telling us what you know of King's Landing and the roads ahead. We might show mercy." The man's eyes flickered with something that might have been hope, or just raw desperation. "There's an army gathering, my lord," he rasped. "Lannister forces from the west, joined with gold cloaks from the city. They're pushing out into the countryside, rounding up any who might be friendly to Stannis or to the wolves. Last I heard, they plan to fortify the outlying villages, use them as forward defenses against any approach." Robb listened intently. "Where are these villages?" The man swallowed. "North of the Blackwater, some near the Roserad. They're building wooden barricades, training local peasants. It might slow you down, but if you come in strength, they'll likely fold." A dart of his tongue wetted his lips. "Please, my lord, I've told you what I know. I beg you, let me go. My family's gone, I have nowhere else." Robb looked at him for a long moment. The man's story might be half-truths, or it might be genuine. In a war like this, sincerity was cheap currency. Yet the detail about villages being fortified was plausible. He glanced at the Great John, who shrugged, expression unreadable. After a tense pause, Robb nodded. "Very well. You will not be harmed if you swear by the old gods never to cross my path again." He motioned to the outriders. "Give him a bit of bread and water, then let him go." The outriders looked surprised but obeyed, dragging the man away. Once the prisoner was gone, the Great John let out a low grunt. A risk, letting him loose. What if he's a Lannister spy indeed? Robb watched the man's retreating form. If he's a spy, he'll bring them little new information. Our presence here is plain enough. And if he's a desperate soul, well, I won't put a dagger in every beggar's back. He sighed. We can't lose what makes us Starks, else we're no better than the lions. Den Tyrann. The Great John's lips twitched into a begrudging smile. "As you say, your grace." He turned to bark orders at the men, and soon the host moved on. They rode into the evening, the land flattening out in places. The sense of approaching King's Landing was palpable. The sky seemed heavier, the air thick with the residue of too many armies passing through. Long after sunset, they made camp in a copse of stunted trees, building only small fires to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Robb's men posted sentries all around. The hush was tense. Some men spoke in whispers about the possibility of meeting Tywin's host any day now. Robb himself could not rest. He walked the perimeter with Grey Wind, scanning the moonlit darkness. In the far distance, he thought he saw a flicker of torchlight on a hill, but it vanished moments later. When he finally forced himself to return to his tent, he found Roose Bolton waiting there, standing with his hands folded at the small of his back. "Lord Bolton," Robb said quietly. "Is something amiss?" Bolton's pale eyes glinted in the lantern light. "Not amiss precisely, but I wondered if you'd heard any word from your mother, my lord." She'd set out to treat with Stannis as well, had she not? Then. Robb's heart clenched briefly. I have heard nothing in recent days. She may still be at Storm's End or traveling. If I know my mother, she'll find her way to us as soon as possible. He shook off the wave of worry. Why do you ask? Bolton offered a smooth, practiced smile. Curiosity, Your Grace. I remember how fervently she negotiated with Renly before his unfortunate end. One wonders if her presence near Stannis might shape the man's thinking on our alliance. Robb caught the subtle insinuation. Stannis isn't easily swayed by soft words, and my lady mother is no sorceress. But she may manage to keep him reasonable until we meet again. Bolton inclined his head. Very wise, Your Grace. Let us hope Lady Catelyn's skill in diplomacy bears fruit. A crucial time, to be sure. He paused, then gave a polite bow. I shall leave you to your rest. When he was gone, Robb exhaled slowly. Roose Bolton unnerved him more than any Lannister might. The man was too calm, too poised, like a blade kept in oil, always ready to slide out and cut. Yet he was a valuable bannerman, and the forces from the Dreadfort served the northern cause. For now, that would have to be enough. At first light, the army pressed on. Each day, they drew closer to the outskirts of King's Landing. The horizon took on a certain haze, as though the city's very presence stained the air. Word from roving scouts confirmed that Lannister patrols were about, but not in overwhelming numbers. More villages appeared, abandoned or meagerly defended. Twice they stumbled upon small pockets of Lannister soldiers, hastily assembled from gold cloaks and local levies, who attempted to bar the road. Each time, Robb's men overwhelmed them in swift, brutal clashes. They took few prisoners. Most of the Lannisters either died fighting or scattered into the surrounding fields, leaving behind a handful of wounded who pleaded for mercy. The first real test came on a drizzly morning when the Stark column approached a crossroads near a hamlet called Old Rainsford. The land was dotted with apple orchards, the fruit rotting on the ground. A swirl of fog clung to the trees. As Robb's vanguard advanced, they noticed wooden barricades and sharpened stakes blocking the road. A banner bearing the Golden Lion on a crimson field fluttered over the rude fortifications. Behind them, a palisade of logs had been erected around the hamlet, forming a makeshift fortress. Smoke rose from within, suggesting a garrison of some size. Robb called his captains to him, studying the barricade from a distance. They're trying to force us around, he said, peering through a spyglass. Or at least slow us enough for reinforcements to arrive. We can't let them harass our rear if we pass on. The great John spat. Let me and my men tear it down, Your Grace. I'll have their heads on pikes by sundown. Robb considered the terrain. We'll lose men attacking a wooden fort, but leaving it behind us is riskier. We do it swiftly, then move on. He snapped the spyglass shut. Arm the catapults. I want that palisade down. In short order, the Stark's small battery of catapults, dragged all the way from the Riverlands, was brought forward. The Lannisters on the walls fired arrows sporadically, though they lacked the range to do much harm. Grey Wind bared his teeth and snarled at the whistling shafts. Robb gave the command, and stones soared overhead, crashing into the barricades. Wood splintered amid shouts of alarm. Some men from the Dreadfort moved in with axes to widen the breach. The defenders answered with a ragged volley of crossbow bolts. A few men fell, clutching at bleeding wounds, but the rest pressed on. Sensing a moment, Robb led a contingent of mounted knights in a flanking maneuver, circling behind the orchard to approach the palisade from another angle. The horses churned mud under their hooves, and the orchard's scattered branches slapped at riders' armor. As they rounded the final stand of trees, Robb saw a gap in the fort's backside, covered only by a thin tangle of brush. He raised his sword, urging the men forward. They crashed through, splintering wood and brush. Surprised Lannister guards let out cries of alarm. Within moments, the area behind the fort was in chaos. Robb and his knights spilled into the hamlet's enclosed space. Some defenders dropped their weapons, scrambling to escape. Others formed a desperate knot, brandishing pikes and swords. The fighting was fierce but brief. Robb parried a thrust aimed at his chest, the force jolting his arm, then slashed across a crossbowman's shoulder. sending him down with a scream. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Karstark's men break through the main barricade. The Lannister garrison, caught between two assaults, crumbled in less than an hour. In the end, around 24 Lannister men lay dead, with more wounded, and the rest taken captive or fled. The hamlet itself was a dismal place. Houses half ransacked, the few surviving villagers cowering in cellars. Robb ordered a quick distribution of any salvageable supplies, then commanded his men to tear down the palisade. He had no wish to occupy Old Rainsford, but neither did he want it used as a fortress again. In the aftermath, Robb walked through the muddy streets, pushing back the hood of his cloak. The drizzle had turned the soil to sludge, and the stench of spilled blood mingled with wet earth. Gray wind prowled at his side, ears pricked. As Robb paused by a ruined cottage, he saw a frightened young girl peeking out from behind its broken door, wide-eyed. Her hair was plastered to her face by the rain. At first she looked ready to bolt, but something in Robb's expression must have told her he meant no harm. Slowly, she stepped forward, shivering in the damp air. He knelt, offering a small, tired smile. "Are you all right?" She looked at the direwolf, trembling. "Don't let it hurt me," she whispered. "He won't," Robb promised, placing a hand on Grey Wind's back. The direwolf's fur bristled under his touch, but the beast made no move toward the girl. "Is there anyone else with you?" She shook her head, tears welling. Robb felt a pang. The war had left countless orphans, countless shattered lives in these fields and villages. For a brief moment he thought of Arya, how young she was, how she might be lost and terrified somewhere in the world. He swallowed hard. He stood and beckoned over one of his guards. "See that she's given dry clothes and a meal," he said quietly. "Then find out if there are any others who need help. We leave soon." "Dajon?" The guard nodded, escorting the girl away. Robb felt the weight of it all pressing on him again. The guilt, the sense that every step forward in this war carved new scars into the land and its people. But this was the path he had chosen. It led south, to King's Landing, to the Lannisters' downfall. To save his sisters, avenge his father, and honor his bannermen, he would see it through. By late afternoon, they set the hamlet behind them in smoldering ruins. The palisade dismantled, the Lannister banners torn down and cast aside. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the sky a flat gray. Robb's men trudged along the road, boots caked with mud, weapons still slick with rain and blood. The incident at Old Rainsford weighed on them, a reminder that the Lannisters would not sit idle. That night, camp was quieter than usual. The men were exhausted, but a grim determination passed among them. They had faced their first significant resistance on the approach to King's Landing, and they had won. Some men sharpened swords by candlelight, wiping blood from the steel with methodical strokes. Others huddled around fires, speaking in hushed voices about the battles to come. An undercurrent of tension rippled through them, a sense that each skirmish brought them closer to a final reckoning. Robb summoned his chief lords, Karstark, Bolton, the Greyjohn, and a few others, into his command tent to reassess their position. A worn map lay spread across a makeshift table, corners weighted by rocks. Robb pointed at a bend in the main road near a landmark called the Weeping Mill, just a day's march east. "Scouts say there's a crossing here that leads down toward the Blackwater. The main route continues on, but we need to be certain we're not flanked. I want our outriders to sweep the area thoroughly." "Dian." Karstark tapped the map, and if Stannis is already moving on his end, he might be drawing out the majority of the Lannister forces. We could find ourselves with an open path to the city's northern gates. Bolton's pale stare flicked over the map. "True enough, my lord. But Tywin is no fool. He may keep his best men for the city's defense, forcing us to launch a difficult siege. Or he might meet us in the field if he thinks the capital's walls can hold out without him for a time. We must be cautious." Robb nodded. "Caution, yes, but we can't delay too long. Stannis wants us in position soon. If we hesitate, the Lannisters could defeat him piecemeal, or the reverse could happen. They might turn all their strength on us if we arrive first." He frowned, tracing the lines on the map with a gauntleted finger. "We push on. We keep scouts wide. If we see a large Lannister force, We fortify somewhere defensible until Stannis can join us. Understood? Nestamor. The gathered lords agreed. Plans were made for rotating watch shifts and foraging parties to gather any supplies from the fields before the Lannisters could deny them. After the meeting, Robb lingered by the table, eyes drifting over the tattered edges of the parchment. The Great John clasped his shoulder. "We'll see it done," he rumbled. "The men believe in you. So do I. No lion can stand against a wolf with a rightful cause." Robb gave a faint smile, warmed by the Great June's unwavering loyalty. "Thank you," he said. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow we ride early." Now, once the Great John had gone, Robb stood there alone. Gray wind lay curled near the brazier, half dozing. The tent felt cold despite the smoldering coals. If only his mother were here, he thought, or even Sir Brynden Tully, to offer counsel. But the Blackfish was stationed elsewhere, protecting River Run's flank. With a heavy exhale, Robb loosened the straps of his armor, letting it clatter onto a nearby stand. He was about to settle onto his bedroll when a guard poked his head through the flap, face anxious. "Your Grace," the guard said, "one of Stannis' riders approaches camp. Shall we admit him?" A flicker of surprise jolted Robb's fatigue. "Yes, bring him here at once." He scooped up a cloak and followed the guard outside. The night air was sharp and smelled of damp earth. Men bustled about as the rider entered the ring of torches around the camp's edge. He wore Stannis' crowned stag on his breastplate and rode a lathered horse, foam flecking its muzzle. The man swung down, wincing as though he had ridden hard and long without rest. "Your Grace," the rider said between gasps, kneeling, "I come with word from Lord Stannis. He requests your immediate assistance. His scouts have sighted Tywin Lannister's host moving east from the Gold Road, rumored to be tens of thousands strong. Stannis intends to intercept them before they can fortify the capital, but he may be outnumbered if the Lannisters link up with the city's garrison. He bids you march south, to meet him near the Kingswood." Robb stared at the messenger, heart pounding. "How far?" 2 or 3 days' ride at a forced pace. "Lord Stannis says time is of the essence." A hush fell over the camp's watchers. Robb could sense their concern, their flicker of dread. If Tywin truly commanded tens of thousands, any pitched battle would be ferocious. But the alternative was letting Tywin slip back into King's Landing, reinforcing the city's defenses. Then their siege would be nearly impossible. Robb clenched his jaw. This was the moment that might decide the entire war. "Very well," Robb said, turning to his gathered lords, many of whom had hurried over at the commotion. "We'll break camp before dawn. We'll head south at once. Send riders ahead to scout for safe routes. We mustn't let the Lannisters pass." "Commanderus?" "Oh." The men nodded, spurred into motion, barking orders to rouse the camp. Tents would come down in the dark, wagons hitched, soldiers prepared to march. The air crackled with urgency. Robb felt a spark of dread mingle with a grim resolve. He had come this far. He would not turn back now. If Stannis was truly facing Tywin, then the king in the north would ride to meet him, not for the sake of the Iron Throne, but for the sake of his father's memory, his sister's freedom, and the north itself. An hour later, the host was stirring. Fires were doused, gear packed. Horses stamped their hooves, steam rising from their nostrils in the cool night. Robb strode among the men, offering words of encouragement where he could, ensuring the outriders knew the direction of the advance. In the flickering torchlight, he saw an odd mixture of determination and fatigue etched on the soldiers' faces. Some had followed him since the march from Winterfell. Others had joined along the way, drawn by the legend of the young wolf who had never lost a battle. Now they would test that legend once more. By the time the first hints of dawn whitened the eastern sky, the column was already on the move, snaking through the low hills. A soft glow illuminated the muddy ruts in the road. Robb rode at the forefront, gray wind loping alongside. His breath billowed in clouds. The day stretched before them, a grueling march that might bring them closer to the decisive battle. Throughout the morning, they covered good ground, pressing hard. Men gritted their teeth, forcing their tired mounts onward. Robb's mind churned with the possibilities. Tywin Lannister's cunning, the uncertain trustworthiness of Stannis, the Red Woman's ominous presence. He felt the weight of every choice. If they failed to trap Tywin outside King's Landing, the entire campaign might collapse. Near midday, the Outriders reported a small group of refugees from the south, coming up the road. Robb gave leave for them to pass, ensuring they offered no threat. These refugees carried pitiful belongings in carts, pulled by skeletal mules, eyes hollow with fear. They whispered of rumors that Tywin's men had torched villages, suspected of harboring Baratheon or Stark sympathizers. The land was turning against itself, each hamlet a pawn in a larger game. Robb clenched the reins, cursing the cruelty of it all. By late afternoon, they reached a wide stretch of open terrain where the road branched. 2 scouts rode back at a gallop, dust clouds trailing behind them. Robb reined in his horse and waited for their report. "The southern branch leads into the Kingswood, Your Grace," the first scout said, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. "We found signs of a large force passing recently, tracks of many horses and wagons. Could be Lannister or Baratheon. But it's fresh, less than a day old." Robb nodded sharply, swallowing the dryness in his throat. "Then we follow. We must hope it's Stannis' path. Or if it's the Lannisters, we'll be on them soon enough." He ordered a brief halt to rest the horses. Men dismounted, easing their stiff limbs, gulping water from leather flasks. The tension was palpable, like a bowstring drawn too tight. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, drifting in soft, uncertain gusts across the open fields. Robb studied the line of trees in the distance, where the Kingswood began its sprawl toward the city. If Stannis had gone in there, or if Tywin's host lurked among the shadows of the forest, the next day or two would bring confrontation. When they resumed the march, the pace was swift and unrelenting. The sun sank lower, turning the sky a bruised orange, then a sullen purple. The silhouettes of tall oaks and pines rose ahead, looming like sentinels over the road. A hush fell on the men as they entered the shadowed canopy, branches arching overhead. The Kingswood was old, thick with tales of bandits and hidden enclaves. Now it might become a battlefield. Here and there, the undergrowth rustled, animals scurrying away from the clank of armor and the tramp of boots. As twilight deepened, Robb ordered torches lit. Their flickering glow cast dancing patterns on the leaves. The men spread out, careful to maintain formation. The road was little more than a winding path here, flanked by tangles of brambles. Scouts were sent ahead, watchers placed on either side. The hush felt oppressive, as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting. Suddenly, a horn sounded from somewhere in front, the low, mournful note of a scout signal. Robb tensed in the saddle. The Greyjohn cursed under his breath. Men drew swords and readied bows. Grey Wind snarled, the sound a deep rumble in his chest. Another horn blast echoed, closer this time. Moments later, a figure on horseback emerged, weaving through the trees. His torch revealed the crowned stag on his tabard, one of Stannis' men. Robb sheathed his blade and rode forward, relief mixed with urgency pulsing in his veins. The rider reined in, sweat coursing down his temples. "Your Grace," the rider gasped. "Lord Stannis is not far ahead. He waits at a clearing by the ravine. Tywin's scouts are close as well. You must hurry." Robb waved his men onward, and they pressed deeper into the wood. Torches bobbed among the trunks, sparks flying whenever a branch scraped against them. Heart thudding, Robb envisioned the confrontation that was about to unfold. Stannis' army somewhere close, Tywin's host bearing down. A single mistake might be fatal. Soon the thick canopy opened into a shallow hollow, where fires glimmered against the darkness. A rough encampment had been made. Men in Baratheon livery huddled around braziers, horses tethered in neat rows. At the center, tall pikes bore the flaming heart and crowned stag banners. Robb's approach was met with immediate tension, but Stannis' knights recognized him. They parted, letting him and his column file into the clearing. The northern bannermen fanned out, uneasy at being so near the Baratheon force under cover of night. Yet no swords were drawn in hostility. They were allies, for now. Stannis himself stepped out from under a canvas canopy, wearing heavy armor despite the hour. Melisandre hovered at his shoulder, her red robes a swirl of shadowy crimson in the torchlight. Stannis' expression was hard and tight. He inclined his head at Robb. "You came quickly," he remarked, as if acknowledging a necessary but unwelcome fact. Robb dismounted, handing the reins to a groom. Grey Wind stood at his side, hackles partially raised. "You sent for aid," Robb said, breath still ragged from the forced march. "We're here." Stannis' eyes flicked over the large number of northern men moving into the clearing. He looked grudgingly satisfied. "We scouted Tywin's host. By dawn they'll be less than a day's march away, just beyond the forest's edge. They mean to break through to King's Landing before my fleet can fully blockade the city. We must face them." Robb nodded. "Good. The advantage is ours if we strike before they can fortify. Show me where they'll come from." Stannis led Robb toward a map pinned to a plank of wood. Melisandre followed silently, her presence like a warm current in the air. Robb caught the faint scent of foreign incense clinging to her robes, a perfume that made his nostrils flare. He forced his focus on the map, a rough sketch of the Kingswood's western edge. "Tywin's men will emerge here," Stannis said, pointing to a narrow exit from the forest, near a rocky ravine. "We can position ourselves along both sides of this choke point. If we coordinate a pincer strike, we might trap a portion of their force. But Tywin has many men he could push through if we're not careful." Robb's eyes narrowed. "Then we must choose the ground carefully. High ground, good vantage for archers." He traced a ridgeline with his fingertip. "If we can anchor our flanks on the ravine and the thickest part of the forest, they'll have to charge us head-on." Stannis grunted in agreement. "We'll place my knights in the center. They're disciplined and well-armored. You can take the right flank with your northerners. Let the left flank be some of my foot from the Stormlands. If Tywin tries to outflank us, we'll close him in a vice." A hush followed as they studied the lines. Robb could feel Melisandre's gaze on him, but he refused to look at her. The plan was a gamble. They were gambling with the fate of two armies. But if they succeeded, Tywin's force could be broken far from the city walls, leaving King's Landing vulnerable. "Make ready for battle," Stannis said at last, stepping back from the map. "We rest here for a few hours, then take our positions before dawn. Tywin won't expect us to strike so soon, especially not with combined forces." Robb offered a curt nod, swallowing the adrenaline already flooding his veins. "My men will be prepared. We'll not let Tywin through." Stannis fixed Robb with that intense stare. "We cannot fail, King Robb. If Tywin breaks past us, the city becomes nigh impregnable. The war drags on. This must be the moment we crush the lion, or we both risk losing everything." Robb met his gaze, remembering the nightmares that plagued him. Lions roaring, shadows swirling, the specter of his father's death. "We won't fail," he said, as much a promise to himself as to Stannis. "When dawn breaks, we strike." A sharp wind ruffled the banners overhead, as if echoing that vow. In the flickering torchlight, Melisandre smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed no warmth. The uneasy alliance of wolf and stag would face the lion in the morning's gray light. Beyond that, the future was as murky as the Kingswood's depths. But Robb Stark felt the burn of determination behind his eyes. Let the Lannisters come. For the sake of his family, his people, and the North, he would meet them head-on. If victory could be found on that bloody field, he would seize it, and carve the next chapter of the war in the lion's own blood. Ka. Darkness lingered in the Kingswood when Robb Stark finally allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment's rest. The moon had waned behind thick clouds, leaving only the faint glow of distant torchlight from the Baratheon camp scattered among the trees. In the hush of these final hours before dawn, every small sound seemed magnified. The rustle of leaves, the clank of arms as soldiers adjusted positions, the quiet breathing of men and horses sharing the same heavy air. Robb sat against the trunk of a broad oak, Grey Wind at his side, the direwolf's ears twitching at each stray noise. Sleep felt impossible. His thoughts churned with images of the coming battle, and every time he began to drift, a new wave of tension jolted him awake. He stood at last, legs cramped, shoulders stiff under his leather jerkin. The camp was half awake, torches burning low in iron sconces. Northern soldiers mingled uneasily with Baratheon men, who a few days prior had been strangers. Though they shared a common enemy, old habits of distrust lingered. Robb could see how the Northerners looked sideways whenever the Red Woman passed. Her figure glided like a crimson wraith between the tents, silent and purposeful. Some men crossed themselves in old, superstitious gestures, no matter that they all bled the same color. The atmosphere was loaded with the presence of powers no one quite understood. He moved toward the main clearing, where both armies had gathered what meager resources they could for the night. The earth was still damp from the earlier rainfall, and each step squelched underfoot. Occasionally, a stray gust of wind sighed through the black canopy overhead, scattering droplets onto cloaks and helmets. Farther along, a pair of Baratheon knights were whispering to one another, checking their warhorses' bridles by the glow of a single lantern. They nodded to Robb, respectful but guarded, and he nodded back, acknowledging a bond forged in necessity. In the center of camp, Stannis' tent stood with a single brazier flickering inside. Melisandre's silhouette glided past the entrance, but Robb glimpsed no sign of Stannis. He guessed the Baratheon king might be poring over maps, or conferring with his commanders one last time. They would speak soon enough. With dawn drawing near, their plans stood on a knife's edge. Each hour that passed allowed Tywin Lannister's forces to creep closer. The slightest misstep could see the Northman-Baratheon alliance crushed before the gates of King's Landing. Robb swung away from Stannis' tent, reluctant to endure a late-night audience with the Red Woman. Instead, he headed toward the newly pitched Stark Command area, a series of smaller tents on the opposite side of the clearing. Clusters of his men, Karstarks, Boltons, Umbers, crouched near fires. Some dozed with arms draped across their knees. Others busied themselves with last-minute repairs to straps and buckles. The hush felt electric, charged by the knowledge that when the sun rose, many of them would fight and perhaps never see another dusk. He paused beside a circle of men who shared a skin of ale, the faint tang of it wafting in the damp air. They looked up at him, young faces wearing expressions caught between fear and excitement. He recognized one as a boy from the Wolfswood, no older than 16. The lad offered the wineskin in a trembling hand, an attempt at courtesy. Robb accepted a sip. The liquid burned at his throat, and for an instant, it cut through the tension. "Rest if you can," Robb murmured, handing the skin back. "At first light we move. When the lines form, look for your lord's standard. Stay with your brothers, watch their backs and keep your shield high." "Yes, your grace," the boy said, voice cracking. He tried to manage a weak grin. Another man, older and scarred, nodded in thanks for Robb's presence, as if it reassured them that their king was just a mortal man who shared their fears. Robb offered a curt nod in return, then moved on, boots sliding across the wet leaves. He circled around to the makeshift paddock where the horses were kept. A pair of grooms brushed down a tall bay mare by the light of a swaying lantern. The smell of wet horse flesh and hay enveloped him. Nearby, the Greyjohn was checking the fittings on his warhorse, a massive destrier with a temper to match its rider. The Greyjohn's big hands moved deftly over straps and buckles, and despite his formidable size, his touch was surprisingly gentle. At Robb's approach, the Greyjohn turned, exposing the broad grin that often flashed after a few gulps of ale. "Your Grace," he said, "you ought to get yourself an hour of sleep. I'll stand guard and make sure no one runs off into the trees." He let out a hearty chuckle, though there was an undertone of tension. Robb shook his head. "I tried. Sleep won't come. My mind's too full." He glanced at the Greyjohn's face, noting the faint shadows under his eyes. "What of you? Not even you can laugh off the dread of what's coming." The Greyjohn exhaled, his breath steaming in the chill air. I'm not blind to the risk, but fighting's in my blood, and I'd wager in yours too. When the horns blow at dawn, we'll show the Lannisters how the North deals with false kings." Robb allowed himself a small, tight smile. "So we will." Then he turned, letting the warmth of camaraderie settle in his chest. He remembered how the Greyjohn had been the first to proclaim him king in the North at River Run. That booming voice echoing in the torchlit hall. That memory fanned a spark of resolve in Robb's soul. Their cause had not changed. They still fought to break the Lannisters' hold on power, to avenge Ned Stark, to rescue Sansa, and to secure the North from endless southern meddling. He patted the Greyjohn's shoulder and moved on. Grey wind tracked his steps, paws nearly silent on the wet ground. Through a gap in the trees, the faintest streak of pale light touched the eastern sky. Dawn was coming. The hush of the camp grew taut as men stirred, gathering arms, adjusting helms, and folding up bedrolls. The final hours of waiting before a battle often held this strange hush, a quiet as deep as any crypt, broken only by the clink of steel and the rasp of sharpened blades. Standing near a circle of low flames, Roose Bolton was in conversation with his men, a half-dozen pale-faced soldiers from the Dreadfort, each wearing the flayed man's sigil upon their chests. Their eyes flicked to Robb when they saw him approach. He noticed the unreadable calm on Bolton's face, as though war was a distant clinical matter to him. Bolton dismissed his men, then inclined his head at Robb. "Your Grace, I've readied my part of the host," Bolton said in a mild voice that did not match the looming battle. "We'll take our positions on the right flank as you ordered. Is there anything else you require?" Robb studied the man's pale, inscrutable expression, remembering again his unease. "But for now, they were allies in purpose. Only that you fight well and stand firm," Robb replied. "The plan demands that none of our lines break. We catch Tywin as he emerges from the forest road. We hold until Stannis' knights charge from the center." Memento Mori. Bolton dipped his head again, so calm he might have been discussing a feast. "We'll do as commanded, Your Grace." He lingered, as if waiting for more words, but Robb had none. Finally, Bolton left, his boots making a soft tread on the damp ground. Robb turned his gaze upward. The eastern horizon was changing color, streaks of gray giving way to the first threads of morning. A subtle shift in the atmosphere rippled through the camp, as men took up arms, checked arrows, and tested the weight of their shields. The hush mutated into a low murmur of final preparations. Smoke from the last embers of cookfires drifted across the clearing, mingling with the acrid scent of oiled armor. Here was the reality of war, an orchestra of tension and dread, played out in quiet motions before the storm. He returned to his own tent to gather his gear. Gray Wind followed him inside, the tent's interior dimly lit by a single lantern. Robb strapped on his boiled leather cuirass over a sturdy tunic, then layered mail over that. The weight was a familiar burden. His shoulders and arms tensed under the memory of 100 marches, a dozen battles. Next came the pauldrons, the greaves, and finally his sword belt, with his steel balanced at his hip. He paused, eyes drifting to the sigil on his cloak. The gray direwolf, sewn into thick wool. It represented everything he fought for. With a steadying breath, he fastened the cloak at his shoulders. Outside, horns sounded, a low, throaty call that echoed through the Kingswood. Robb felt adrenaline flood his veins. That was the signal to form up. Stannis' men were sounding off, and the Northerners answered with their own horns. A wave of stirring men, stamping hooves and rattling harnesses, poured through the camp. Robb emerged to a swirl of motion. Officers shouted directions. Archers hurried to find their companies. War horses pawed the ground, breath steaming. Torches glimmered against the dawn's uncertain light. Robb vaulted onto his horse, a sturdy gray courser that whickered anxiously at Gray Wind's presence. He steadied the reins and guided the animal forward, weaving among the ranks to find his place at the fore. The Great John was there, astride a massive chestnut, brandishing an iron-tipped lance. Karstark, grim-faced and silent, led a detachment of cavalry on the flank. Bolton's men formed a disciplined wedge to the right. The direwolf banners swayed overhead, ghostly shapes in the half-light. Across the clearing, Stannis lines formed in their own rigid ranks. Their banners, the crowned stag and a flaming heart, seemed to shimmer against the gloom. Robb spotted Stannis on a black warhorse, wearing dark plate and no cloak, as though even the cold air was an afterthought. The Red Woman sat her own mount near him, though she did not wear armor. She was robed in crimson, that same mysterious swirl of cloth that seemed to devour the shadows around her. Their eyes met across the short distance, and Robb felt a tremor of unease. She lifted her chin in acknowledgement, a gesture that might have been some silent benediction. Then the horns brayed again. The combined force marched. They moved out of the clearing in grim silence, hoofbeats thudding on damp loam. The eastern sky was lightening to a pale washed-out blue, though the sun had not yet broken through the trees. The column broke into segments as planned. Stannis knights and heavy infantry in the center, Robb's Northmen on the right side, and a contingent of Stormlanders on the left. Outriders fanned ahead, seeking the vantage that would let them see Tywin's approach from deeper within the Kingswood. The forest thickened around them, branches interlocking overhead, the path narrowing. Early morning mist snaked between trunks, veiling the world in pale ribbons. They reached the ridge near the ravine by sunrise. The ground dipped ahead, forming a natural funnel through which any large force would have to pass. Stannis signaled the men to dismount or hold their lines. Pikemen formed ranks behind lines of archers, while cavalry waited behind a screen of trees. The plan was to let Tywin's vanguard appear, pin them, then unleash a coordinated charge. Simple in theory, but any number of complications could arise. Nerves breaking among the foot soldiers, misread signals, hidden Lannister skirmishers. Robb's thoughts raced, but he forced himself to calm. The men's breath came out in frosty plumes, hearts pounding as they settled into position. The Greyjohn took up a spot near Robb, massive shoulders hunched against the morning chill. Bolton and Karstark arranged their own lines further to the right, where the ravine curved. From a vantage on a slight rise, Robb could see the treetops swaying, the early sunlight playing off the dew-ivory. It looked oddly peaceful, at odds with the dread he felt. Every single soldier on both sides seemed to hold his breath, waiting. A crow cawed from a branch overhead. Robb's horse shivered under him, and Grey Wind, standing at Robb's stirrup, let out a low huff. The stillness stretched until it felt like the forest itself was listening. Then, faintly, came the thump of distant drums. Robb tensed. The men around him shifted, muttering. Drums, low and rhythmic, carried on the breeze. Lannisters, he thought. They were coming. He lifted his sword hand, signaling archers to ready. No one spoke. The hush thickened with each rolling beat of the drum. Far across the funnel of land, shapes began to emerge through the trees. Armored riders, banners of crimson and gold. Even at a distance, Robb could see the Golden Lion. Dust or morning mist swirled around them, giving the impression of a host materializing from some netherworld. Tywin's columns advanced slowly, methodically, with the discipline of men who had marched countless miles under those banners. Stannis' outriders galloped back, crossing the clearing to join their lines. One shouted breathlessly at the cluster of Baratheon officers, presumably confirming the Lannisters' numbers. Even from here, Robb could guess it was a large force. He could make out multiple ranks of infantry behind the cavalry, wagons loaded with supplies, and the telltale shapes of siege equipment. Tywin meant to break Stannis, then fortify King's Landing. Robb felt his heart hammering. This was the moment. The plan was to let Tywin's vanguard come far enough to be trapped between the rising ground at Robb's flank and the thicker forest on the other side. Then, with the Baratheon knights crashing down the center, the Northerners would sweep in to close the trap. If all went well, Tywin's army would find itself pressed on three sides. But battles rarely conform to tidy strategies. Robb braced himself for the chaos to come. At the center, Stannis raised his sword, the polished steel flashing in the new sun. Horns blew. A wave of tension shuddered across the Allied lines, and the men roared their battle cries, some calling out, "Stannis! Stannis!" while others shouted, "The King in the North!" The cacophony rose, echoing in the forest gloom. The Lannisters responded with their own horns and shouts, an undercurrent of defiant fury. The first lines of Lannister cavalry kicked into a canter, their lances lowered. Robb caught the flash of steel and sunlight on breastplates. He raised his sword high. "Archers!" he shouted, voice raw. A line of northern bowmen let loose. Arrows hissed overhead in a dark cloud, arcing downward into the Lannister front. Men toppled from saddles, horses screamed, but the wave of riders kept coming. Robb spurred his horse forward, glancing to his right. The Greatjon and Karstark's men thundered beside him, an avalanche of hooves and steel. He glimpsed Bolton's men on foot, pikes leveled, waiting to meet the brunt of the Lannister flank. A second volley of arrows whistled overhead, striking the packed ranks. Then, with a crash like the world splitting open, the lines collided. Robb slashed at the nearest rider, meeting steel on steel in a jarring impact that rattled his bones. The Lannister soldier's face contorted behind the visor as he struggled to parry. Hooves trampled the ground. Men cried out. Grey Wind bounded into the fray, lunging at an exposed flank. The chaos was dizzying. Shields splintered. Lances snapped. Arrows whined. The smell of crushed grass and fresh blood filled the air. The Greatjon let out a roar, swinging a massive battle axe. Several Lannister riders fell back, stumbling over the piled bodies of their comrades. Karstark's cavalry hammered into the reeling flank, spurring confusion in the Lannisters' ranks. Bolton's pikemen advanced, thrusting upward to unhorse any who strayed too close. Yet the Lannisters kept coming in wave after wave, emboldened by numbers. Amid the tumult, Robb caught sight of a tall knight in gilded armor, the lion's head etched on his pauldrons. The knight wheeled his horse, spotting Robb's direwolf banner, and charging. Robb spurred forward to meet him, swords ringing in a ferocious clash. The knight was skilled, each blow struck with force. Robb deflected, felt a wrench in his shoulder, nearly lost his balance. Grey Wind snarled, leaping at the knight's horse. The horse reared, giving Robb the opening to thrust. His blade pierced the gap in the knight's armor, and the man slumped, blood staining his crest. Robb wrenched his sword free with a grimace. He reined around, searching the swirling melee for signs of how the rest of the battle fared. Through the shifting bodies and half-broken lines, he glimpsed Stannis' heavy infantry pressing forward, locked in savage combat with the Lannister center. The crash of steel on steel echoed like thunder. At intervals, Baratheon knights cut paths into the Lannisters, banners flaring behind them. But from the forest behind Tywin's lines, more red and gold soldiers emerged. Reinforcements. The Lannisters had brought a formidable host indeed. Robb felt a tremor of dismay. If Tywin had more men than anticipated, their plan might be overrun. He bellowed for the Greatjon and Karstark to hold formation. The Greatjon, his beard flecked with blood, swung his axe in great arcs, driving back a cluster of spearmen. Karstark's horse was gone. Robb saw the Lord fighting on foot, a wild-eyed intensity fueling each stroke of his sword. Bolton's line, meanwhile, advanced in a disciplined press, stepping over bodies in a grim shuffle. They were pushing the Lannister flank, but the enemy center was far from broken. Deeper into the fray, the roar of horns and the clang of steel escalated. Robb urged his horse forward, trying to press any advantage. He hacked at a Lannister footman who stumbled, then brought up his shield just in time to deflect a spear from another. Grey Wind lunged, snapping at the spearman's arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. Robb's sword came down, and the man fell. Blood spattered the grass, bright against the morning dew. For all the savagery, the plan seemed to be working. The Lannister vanguard was trapped in the choke point, hammered from both sides. But the momentum threatened to shift if Tywin's rear forces pushed through. Stannis' knights alone could not hold them all. Robb urged the Greatjon to gather enough men for a second cavalry surge. They withdrew briefly to regroup, leaving the front lines to the infantry. Arrows still whistled from overhead, though many archers were already low on shafts. When Robb managed a quick glance across the center, he saw Stannis himself, sword raised, urging his men forward. The Baratheon king's face was grim with sweat and dust. At his side, Melisandre sat astride her horse. Of all things, wearing no armor but brandishing a strange staff, topped with a small brazier of flame. Even in the chaos, men parted around her as if wary of the heat. Whether it was sorcery or mere fear, she advanced untouched. Robb found the sight unsettling, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had a battle to win. He spurred his horse back into the fight, leading a wedge of northern cavalry through a gap where a cluster of Lannister archers had begun to form. The archers scattered, loosing panic shots that flew wide. Hooves churned mud and grass. Robb's men slammed into the disordered ranks, driving them apart in screams and flying limbs. Smoke and dust swirled around them, stinging his eyes. He coughed, adrenaline surging. A sudden horn blast cut through the din. A Baratheon signal from somewhere on the left flank. Robb swiveled to see if they were being flanked themselves. But the line still held. He glimpsed the Great John, axe gleaming red, bellowing orders for footmen to press the advantage. It looked as though they had forced the Lannisters to yield ground near the ravine. Bodies littered the slope, the grass stained black with blood. For an instant, hope flared. They might actually break Tywin's lines here, isolate the front from the rear. Then, from the deeper forest, horns answered in a different tone, harsh and brassy. More Lannisters. Robb watched, heart thudding, as a fresh column of cavalry emerged through a narrow trail. Smashing into the Baratheon flank, he heard the clash of arms, the cries of men caught unaware. The plan to trap Tywin's entire force in the choke point was undone if they had discovered another path around. Now Stannis' left flank reeled under the unexpected blow. Robb grit his teeth. Stannis was too far away for direct aid. The best Robb could do was intensify pressure on this side. Hoping to force Tywin to recall some of his men, he gestured to Karstark, who was still fighting on foot, and roared above the din, "Push forward! We must reach the center! Cut them off!" Karstark nodded, blood streaking his face, and rallied his bannermen. They carved a path through the melee, steel colliding with steel. Robb guided his horse after them, slashing at any Lannister soldier who came within reach. The thunder of hooves and the screams of the dying seemed unending. Somewhere behind him, Grey Wind lunged at a fallen man who tried to rise, snapping jaws closing quickly. The direwolf's muzzle was dark with gore. Finally, they reached a slight clearing in the midst of the carnage, where the battered remains of the Lannister vanguard had attempted to regroup. Shields formed a ragged wall, spears bristling outward. At their center stood an older knight in ornate plate, silver hair plastered to his forehead, eyes narrowed with the intensity of command. Robb didn't recognize him immediately, but the man's armor bore the Lion of Lannister. Another highborn lord, perhaps. He barked orders, trying to rally the men around him. Robb urged his horse into a gallop, the Great John and Karstark at his flank. Together they crashed against the shield wall. Spear points glanced off armor, or punctured through horses. Shouts and curses ripped the air. Robb's sword slammed into a shield, nearly jarring it from the soldier's arm. The soldier stumbled, giving Robb an opening to thrust. The blade found flesh. The man crumpled. The entire line wavered. Karstark lunged forward, shield up, sword stabbing at the next spearman in line. The Great John let out another fearsome roar, swinging his axe in a downward arc that cleaved through a helmet. Blood splattered his face. A few men screamed and fled. The older knight tried to hold his ground, hacking at a northern rider who got too close. But the weight of the charge overwhelmed him. He was knocked from his feet, helmet rolling away in the grass. A swift thrust from Karstark ended his life. Seeing their commander fall, the remaining Lannister men around him faltered. Some threw down their weapons, others turned tail. Robb caught his breath, the taste of metal on his tongue. If they could break enough pockets like this, the entire Lannister front might collapse. But the sounds of intense fighting still rose all around, especially on the left, where Stannis had to contend with that fresh cavalry. Robb couldn't see the Red Woman or Stannis from here. The swirling dust and press of bodies obscured them. He motioned his men to regroup. Bolton's pike line was advancing methodically, stepping over the dead. Robb felt a moment of gratitude that Bolton was as ruthless as rumored. His men showed no mercy, dispatching fallen foes without hesitation. Horrifying though it was, it kept the Lannisters from rallying anew. Robb signaled to the Great John, who caught his meaning and bellowed for more men to secure the clearing. The Lannister survivors bolted into the trees, panicked. A few were cut down by swift arrows or a dire wolf's fang. The rest vanished, leaving only the groans of the wounded behind. Robb took a quick survey. The day was half spent, the sun now shining through scattered clouds. The once dewy grass was churned into a muddy soup. Bodies lay thick across the ravine slopes. The din of battle still raged behind the tree line, but here it seemed the Lannister vanguard was decimated. He reined his horse around, scanning for any sign that Tywin Lannister himself was present. In some battles, capturing or killing the enemy commander could end the fight swiftly, but Tywin had not shown himself so far. Likely he remained with the main body, safe behind layers of men. Drums boomed once more, and Robb heard horns calling from the direction of the left flank. He pressed his horse onward, leading a contingent across the battlefield toward the deeper fighting. As they moved, they passed pockets of wounded men. Some begged for mercy, others simply moaned in pain. A few of Robb's men paused to give water or end suffering with a quick thrust. The stink of death was everywhere. Emerging into another section of the forest, Robb saw the smoke of burning brush. Flames licked at some of the undergrowth, possibly sparked by a stray lantern or a flaming arrow. The heat and smoke stung his eyes. Through the haze, he glimpsed the heavy cavalry of Stannis, grappling with a strong Lannister formation. The gold cloak of the lion was all around them. Stannis' ranks appeared battered yet unyielding, though pockets were forming. Baratheon men in battered plate tried to hold tight formation, while mounted knights clashed with Lannister horsemen. Robb spotted a swirl of red cloth near the center. Melisandre perched on her horse. Fire glowed on her staff, sending flickers of flame across the swirling battle. He led his men in from the flank. Lannisters were so focused on the Baratheons that they barely saw the northern cavalry until it was too late. Robb's force crashed into them, striking them from the side, sowing confusion. Spears and swords met with screams. Horses stumbled and fell. One Lannister captain shouted for a rally, only to be cut down by a swift blow from a nameless Stark bannerman. In the thick of that melee, Robb glimpsed Stannis. The Baratheon king swung his blade, face spattered with blood, shield dented. He and a handful of knights formed a wedge around Melisandre, who still clutched that flaming staff. She was chanting something, though Robb couldn't hear the words over the clamor of steel. Lannister soldiers reeled back, as if uncertain whether to approach her. Some broke ranks entirely, fear etched on their faces. Robb wondered if her presence alone unnerved them more than a sword at their throats. He pressed forward, slashing at a soldier who had turned to run. He felt the hot spray of blood. Another man stumbled into his path. Robb's horse reared, lashing out with iron-shod hooves. The man collapsed under the pounding. Gray wind darted in, finishing him with savage efficiency. Out of the corner of his eye, Robb saw Stannis knights pushing the advantage, forging deeper into the Lannister lines. The left flank was turning in their favor, but it was not a clean victory, even as Lannisters fell back. Some fought to the death, refusing to yield. Others rushed from the trees, fresh reinforcements that seemed to trickle out from hidden paths. The entire area was a chaotic swirl of fighting units, each struggling for space in the thick forest. If the Lannisters had not planned for a battle here, they were adapting quickly, using the terrain to funnel in new men. Robb realized how precarious it was. One route cut off by collapsed trees, another route blockaded by pike lines, a swirl of dust and smoke obscuring friend from foe. At last a shrill horn blew, this time from somewhere among the Lannisters. It rang out again, a desperate note. Robb recognized the call to retreat. A flurry of movement rippled through the enemy ranks. Some men threw down shields and bolted. Others tried to form a protective rearguard, backing away from the carnage. Shouts of fall back," echoed among the trees. The Allied forces roared triumph, pushing forward. Exhausted, drenched in sweat and blood, Robb found himself inhaling the thick smoke as he urged his horse to keep pace. The Lannisters were in disarray, and this was the moment to press them hardest. But the forest confounded a full pursuit. Narrow trails, fallen logs, pockets of brush on fire. He spotted the Greatjon and Karstark among the ranks of battered northerners, both men alive, though spattered with grime and gore. Bolton's pike lions also advanced, stepping over the wounded and the dead alike. Amid the chaos, Robb caught a glimpse of a distinctive standard bearing the twin towers of House Frey. Confusion startled him. He hadn't known any Freys to be present with the Baratheons or Lannisters, but it might have been a captured banner. He couldn't be sure. The swirl of movement consumed any chance to investigate. Instead, he drove his men forward, rallying them to chase the fleeing foe. Shouts of "the North" rose, mingling with the Baratheon war cries. Branches whipped at Robb's armor as he pressed deeper. He found himself near Stannis again, who had dismounted at some point, his black warhorse lost or slain. The Baratheon king was breathing hard, leaning on his sword, helm dented. Melisandre stood close by, watching the final pockets of Lannisters attempt to slip away. For a moment, their eyes met across the smoke. Robb saw the gleam of exhaustion in Stannis, the raw anger that fueled him, and in Melisandre's gaze, he sensed a strange satisfaction, as if she had foreseen all of this. Then her head tilted, focusing on some shape in the distance. Robb followed her line of sight, but saw only men scurrying among the trees. Gradually, the horns of retreat faded, replaced by the groans of the dying and the triumphant jeers of the living. The forest clearing seemed to expand, branches snapping underfoot as the allied forces spread out, securing the area. Bodies of men and horses lay strewn everywhere. Some pinned beneath shattered wagons, others tangled in roots or piled where the lines had collided. The smell was worse now, a rancid mix of blood, sweat, and the beginnings of decay. Ravens flocked to the treetops, sensing the feast below. Robb forced himself to steady his breathing. The battle had been fierce, and it might not be over entirely. Some Lannister remnants were out there, possibly regrouping. Yet the day was theirs. Tywin's attempt to pass through the Kingswood had been stopped, his forces scattered. Robb dismounted, nearly stumbling as his legs trembled from the rush of combat. Grey wind pressed against him, panting heavily, muzzle and fur streaked with gore. He wiped his sword on a patch of grass, still half expecting a fresh wave of Lannisters to burst from the shadows. But none came, only the lingering echoes of men calling for medics, the hacking coughs of the wounded. Stannis approached, sword dragging in the dirt behind him. His face was smeared with soot and blood, his jaw set. "It appears Tywin has retreated," he said, voice rough. "We've won the field, if it can be called a victory." His gaze swept over the carnage, bitterness etched in every line of his face. "Though many good men lie here." Robb nodded, feeling the heavy truth of those words. "We had no choice. He would have reached the city otherwise. We had to stop him." He paused, the sting of sweat dripping into a cut above his brow. "You fought well." The alliance held. Stannis allowed a curt nod. "We'll have to tally our losses and reorganize. We can't leave Tywin out there to recover. We must press on or risk him regrouping closer to King's Landing. My scouts say some of his men fled north. Others due east. He's split, which is good for us. But we must move quickly to avoid letting him slip away." Melisandre drew closer, that staff still smoldering. The flickers of flame in the brazier atop it seemed unnaturally bright despite the daylight. "The darkness recoils," she murmured, her voice soft yet carrying. "But it has not been vanquished. The Lord of Light smiles on us this day, but caution is needed." Robb tensed at the mention of her god. He saw how some of his men watched her with open mistrust. He swallowed his retort, focusing on the practicalities of pursuit. "My men are weary," he told Stannis. "But if we let Tywin slip away, we might face him again at the gates of the city. And that would be far worse." Stannis' lip curled. "We can rest an hour or two, see to the wounded, then continue. I've no intention of halting while Tywin breathes." Robb saw the flicker of sorrow in Stannis' eyes as he surveyed the dead. For all his hardness, the man felt the cost. Then Stannis turned, calling over a knight in battered armor to handle immediate troop dispositions. Melisandre glided after him, her staff's fire dancing. Robb stepped away, his stomach twisting at the sight of so many corpses. The Greyjohn passed by, cradling a minor cut on his forearm, though his grin remained fierce. "We drove them off, your grace. Sent them scrambling like rats. We should finish them for good." "Danpiral." "We will," Robb said. "Gather any stragglers. Help the wounded if you can." He looked around, searching for Karstark or Bolton. He saw Karstark kneeling near two of his men who lay unmoving, blood pooling under them. A flicker of grief crossed Karstark's face as he recognized them. Robb's heart sank, recalling how Karstark had already lost sons to the war. The man stood, lips pressed in a white line, and walked on without a word. Bolton appeared soon after, a calm expression set on his pale features. "Your Grace," he said quietly. "My men stand ready to continue or hold as needed." We took moderate losses, but the lines were effective. He cast a glance at the bodies. We should bury our dead, burn the Lannisters. Disease spreads quickly in these woods. Robb grimaced. See it done, but quickly. We can't linger long. He lifted his gaze to the smoky sky. We move within 2 hours. Bolton nodded, gliding away with that eerie composure. Robb watched him go, then turned to find a place to breathe. The forest felt stifling, haunted by echoes of violence. Gray wind padded beside him, chest rising and falling with fatigue. When Robb reached a fallen log, he slumped onto it, dropping his blood-slick sword in the dirt. His limbs shook, every bruise and scratch throbbing. Closing his eyes, he tried to quell the swirl of battle images, flashes of steel, the cries of the dying, the press of bodies. It felt as though war had seeped into the core of his being, leaving no space for anything else. A rough voice startled him. It was the Greatjon looming behind him, offering a skin of water. Robb accepted, gulping it down. The Greatjon then pulled out a ragged cloth from his belt and wiped the gore from Robb's sword. In another setting, it might have been a touching gesture of loyalty. Here, it was just necessity. Your Grace, the Greatjon said in a quieter tone than usual. Take heart, we won a great victory today. Robb nodded tiredly. Aye, we did. But Tywin's not beaten yet. We have to end this. We will, the Greatjon said, slapping Robb's shoulder once gently. We'll run that old lion into the ground. Robb let out a long breath. His mind wandered to the reason for all this. The memory of Ned Stark's head on a pike in King's Landing. The captivity of Sansa. The missing Arya, and the vow that the North would no longer kneel. In that moment, exhaustion and determination warred within him. He would not rest until the Lannisters fell. The men around him deserved a chance to go home, to see their families again, to rebuild the lives that war had shattered. All around them, the Allied camp took shape in the aftermath. Men limped between makeshift stations, calling for healers. Fires were lit to burn the dead. Horses whinnied, spooked by the smell of blood. The sun rose higher, revealing the devastation in stark clarity. The forest floor was torn up by hooves and wheels, and battered armor glinted among the bodies. Crows circled overhead, their cawing an ominous serenade. Eventually, Robb pushed himself to his feet. He spotted Roose Bolton directing men to collect the wounded, while Karstark walked among the dead, searching for survivors. The Greatjon was helping a soldier whose leg had been gashed open. Robb raked a hand through his matted hair, feeling too young for all this. Yet he was king, and kings did not have the luxury to wallow. 2 hours, he reminded himself. Then they would ride again, hunting Tywin's retreating forces. When he passed Stannis' makeshift command post, he found Baratheon soldiers gathering around. The standard of the Flaming Heart stood lopsided, pinned into blood-soaked ground. Stannis himself knelt by the body of a fallen knight, his expression unreadable. Melisandre hovered a few paces behind. Robb slowed, uncertain if he should speak. After a moment, Stannis rose, dusted off his knees, and turned to face him. "We reform the lines soon," Stannis said, voice hollow. "The Lord of Light carried us through the worst of it, though at a heavy cost. We must chase Tywin before he can regroup." Robb nodded, ignoring the mention of that god. "Agreed. I'll have my outrunners scout the southern trails. We suspect Tywin might try to skirt the forest and head for the Roserad. If he does, we can catch him in open terrain." Stannis' mouth tightened. "Then let us make certain. I'll gather my knights and we'll strike at once." "No." Melisandre inclined her head, the flicker of her staff's fire dancing even in daylight. Robb glanced at her only briefly. There was no warmth or pity in her eyes, only a fierce conviction that felt almost alien. He couldn't decide whether she was savior or menace, or something in between. It scarcely mattered now. He left them and returned to his men, instructing the Greatjon, Karstark, and Bolton to prepare for a forced march. The battered legion of soldiers inhaled what rest they could, gnawing on hard bread, gulping water, or letting the healers bind shallow wounds. Others stacked Lannister corpses, piling them for burning, while the northern dead were set aside for a more respectful burial. Time was short, though, and the forest stench grew thick with the odor of charred remains. When the hourglass ran out, horns sounded once more. Robb mounted his weary horse, wincing at the stiffness in his limbs. He surveyed the allied host. They had lost many, the ranks visibly thinned, but the men who remained wore grim, determined faces. They had tasted victory and wanted more. Out front, Stannis' standard-bearers unfurled the flaming heart, though the fabric was stained with mud and something darker. Alongside them rose the direwolf of House Stark, gray on white, a reminder to friend and foe alike that the North was here. Unbowed, they moved out under the noonday sun, a slow procession at first, then gathering speed. Scouts fanned ahead, scanning for signs of Tywin's path. Smoke from the battle lingered in the canopy as they wound their way through the deeper parts of the Kingswood, stepping around felled trunks and trampled brush. Every man was on edge, expecting another ambush, but none came. The Lannister horns and drums had gone silent. Time dragged, each mile seeming to stretch. The forest eventually thinned, revealing gently rolling hills. From those hills, the Roserwad lay to the south, winding toward King's Landing. Robb could almost sense the city in the distance, the seat of the Iron Throne, the place where his father had died, the place that held Sansa captive. For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope flared within him. If Tywin's army was truly broken, King's Landing might fall quickly. Sansa could be freed. The North could be avenged. And yet, an undercurrent of dread reminded him that Tywin was a cunning fox. A single victory did not guarantee the war's outcome. Late in the afternoon, one of the outriders returned at a gallop. Robb reined in his horse, heart pounding, as the man reported. "We found tracks, Your Grace, lots of them. They lead south to the Roserad, then split again. Seems Tywin divided his men. Some appear to head east, perhaps to slip around the city walls. The rest continue south, presumably aiming to rejoin the main roads. Hard to say how many remain, but it's a sizable force." Stannis rode closer, having overheard. "Then he's trying to scatter us, forcing us to choose which direction to pursue. Clever." Robb tightened his grip on the reins. "He wants to draw us away. If we separate, we risk being defeated in detail. But if we stick together, he might circle behind or slip into King's Landing by stealth." He exhaled, scanning the horizon. "We must decide." Stannis' voice was grim. "If he slips into the city, we face a siege. My ships can blockade the sea, but the city's walls are formidable. A long siege is not what we want." He glanced at Robb. "We cannot let Tywin vanish." Robb thought of the cost of another extended campaign around King's Landing. The men were already worn. The North needed an end to this war. "We can't chase both columns effectively," he said, forcing his mind to weigh options. "Let's aim for the larger one. If we destroy that, Tywin loses his main strength. He might be traveling with it. As for the smaller force, we can send riders to shadow them. Ensure they don't slip past us unseen." Stannis grunted in agreement. "Then so be it. We march south, keep the main Lannister host in sight, and press them until they break or we corner them." He gestured to his men. "Let's form up and move." Robb turned to the Greyjohn, Karstark, and Bolton. "You heard him. Form the lines. I want outriders on both flanks, a scouting party trailing the eastern column, and the main body following me. We march at once." "Landing." The lords nodded, setting about their tasks. The soldiers grumbled but obeyed, forging onward despite exhaustion. The day's heat bore down on them, a sharp contrast to the morning's chill in the Kingswood. Sweat dripped into fresh wounds, and horses labored under the strain. Yet no one dared complain aloud. They had come too far. The only path now was forward, where Tywin's battered legion staggered toward uncertain refuge. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, shadows stretched across the road. Robb rode at the head of the column, forcing himself to ignore the sting of cuts along his arms and the ache in his shoulders. Gray Wind loped alongside, ears perked. Behind them, the combined might of the North and Stannis Baratheon advanced, bloodied, tired but unbroken. By the time they caught sight of the first true farmland outside the forest, the sky had begun to glow with the red and gold wash of sunset. Off in the distance they saw it. Dust clouds kicked up by a marching host. Even at this range, Robb recognized the telltale signs. He exchanged a grim look with Stannis. Tywin was close, retreating but not yet broken. Another day, perhaps two, and they would meet again. Robb felt the tension coil in his gut, a fearsome mixture of dread and determination. This was the war he had chosen, the vow he had made. The wolf and the stag would keep pursuit until the lion had nowhere left to run. They pressed on into the twilight, hearts pounding with each mile. Ahead the sky bled pink and orange, as if mirroring the day's carnage. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new struggles, and perhaps a final confrontation. Robb Stark had no illusions about the cost. In the shadows of the approaching night, he steeled himself, hoping his choice would lead them all one step closer to ending the Lannister stranglehold and freeing the North from the burdens of the South forever.